Hello, my name is Andrew Geary and welcome to Seismic Sound Off, in-depth conversations in applied geophysics. In this episode, I speak with Ioan Vlad on his article in The Leading Edge analyzing over 80 years of affiliation information for articles in geophysics. Ioan examines long-term publishing trends in geophysics, including affiliation information and geographic trends. Using Python, statistics, and visual analysis, Ioan explores how understanding these trends could be valuable both for institutional decision-making and for individual career planning. Ioan Vlad is the Senior Scientific Programmer for Atmospheric and Environmental Research in Albuquerque, New Mexico. His expertise includes software engineering and database administration, data analysis, scientific and high-performance computing software development, and interfacing between research and production. He holds a master's and PhD in geophysics from Stanford University. Now, for our conversation. Your article in the September TLE is called Exploratory Analysis of Affiliation Information in Geophysics Articles. So how would you summarize this article?
Well, as geophysicists are most likely familiar with, when an author publishes in geophysics, affiliation, that is a company or the university for which they work, is also displayed in the article. And SEG, when they digitized the entire archive of geophysics from 1936 to present, they included this affiliation information, basically who the author works for. They included it in XML. So I basically came up with the idea of writing a script, a piece of software that would extract this information, and then I analyze it to see what institutions, what industry, research institutions, universities, where are the people who publish in geophysics coming from? So then I extracted from this data a variety of interesting trends, and well, that's what the article is about.
Why were you interested in exploring this line of inquiry?
Well, I always enjoyed having fun with data, and I also saw some disconnect between what a lot of the marketing and materials of industry communications were saying about, the number of publications and the state of the industry. So I couldn't help being intrigued by this and started to look at it to examine if the problem can be posed in a quantitative way.
So you discovered in this work that there were 11,658 non-editorial articles published in geophysics in this time frame. And in recent years, you saw there's been an exponential growth in articles. What do you think led to this growth?
By its nature, exponential growth manifests very slowly at first, and then it emerges explosively. Such a mechanism can be underlying the data even during what appears to be just a very slow uptrend. So if you write the equations, you discover that exponentials appear when growth engenders even more growth. Bacteria multiplication is a classical example. So if we are to look for the cause of an exponential growth, it will be something of that nature. In the paper, I briefly mentioned potential causes for this growth, but I would like to look at them one by one in more detail, because this question has a lot of iceberg under the surface of the sea. So, Geophysics is a scientific journal of the Society of Exploration Geophysicists, so an ever-increasing number of papers may be indicative of flourishing research and development in resource exploration. So is that the case? Now, research in any applied field has a life cycle that starts with the initial idea and ends with the industrial application. It's like a pipeline, if you will. So in a healthy R&D ecosystem, academia and industry publications should grow at the same pace. In an applied field, the success of any new idea is defined by the success of its eventual application. It can be argued that even an article that was not applied in the industry in the first few years after its publication may ultimately be found and used years or decades later. There have been a few select such cases, but in the vast majority of cases, applied research publications that do not get applied are simply forgotten. The drop in both relative and absolute numbers of industry publications showed by the data shows that resource exploration R&D as a whole, in aggregate, the whole life cycle, the whole pipeline, is not flourishing. At one end of the pipeline, we have large amounts of academic publications, and at the other, we have fewer and fewer actual applications of this data. The process of applying a new idea in production generates other ideas and improvement. You need industry R&D people to operationalize, test, and scale up academic ideas, and all of this would generate publications too. There is no reason why the industry would become constantly more secretive over decades. And there are many benefits for publishing in the industry to advertising your competence, protecting your work against later patent claims through peer review and discussion and so on. So the size of the R&D work pipeline is proportional to the size of its industry, and that one is shrinking. Now, the figures in the paper show that the number of industry applications is dropping, and also the relative number of research institute publications is slightly dropping too. So it follows that the increase in academia publications is the one that's responsible for most of the growth, university. Most likely, more and more university researchers got familiar with the methods of exploration geophysics. They saw a possible source of funding other than the government grants mill, and started applying their knowledge in this field. Now, I only now realize I should have also looked at the number of universities publishing each year, and I would expect it would show a steady increase, regardless of where those universities are. So each of those principal investigators that dip their toes into the exploration research waters, they will train their graduate students to do the same. And this is a kind of mechanism that fuels its own growth and can lead to an exponential curve. Now, these academics are coming into this field from a wide variety of backgrounds, so it is likely for a broadening of focus to have occurred as they bring their varied interests. In order to prove this hypothesis, one would have to categorize articles into subfields of geophysics based on their content. This classification is a great classical application of data science, and should somebody perform such an analysis and should its results support the hypothesis of a broadening focus, it would then be up to the geophysics editorial board to decide whether such a broadening of focus constitutes enrichment or mission creep. Another very important addition to the number of researchers in this field is parts of the world becoming better developed and connected. East Asia in general and China in particular are contributing to this trend. Their overall level of development has increased dramatically, and this by itself has fueled even more growth, as we discussed for the exponential trends. Now, one other factor that I briefly mentioned in the article was a possible change in acceptance standards. Basically, there are more papers getting accepted. I can see two ways in which this hypothesis can be tested. One would be analyzing submission acceptance rates. But this is, it's quite unlikely that geophysics has kept track of this information over decades. I don't know, they probably didn't. Another, much more difficult way would be somehow measuring the impact of each paper. Now, when trying to measure the impact, the question of what the focus of geophysics should be comes into play. Because if that focus is supposed to be strictly advancing applied exploration for natural resources, then the impact should be measured in terms of actual applications of that particular technique in the industry in some well-defined period after, some number of years after the article is published. Now, if the focus is more broad, then measuring impact by counting references to a paper, like when academics compute their impact factors for journals and so on, that's easy to do. The problem is that, of course, this measure can be gamed quite a lot.
I want to follow up on something you mentioned there around how there's been increased collaboration. Countries like China have been increasing. You talk in the paper how even universities across countries are collaborating on these papers. You kind of discovered a magic number for collaborators hoping to publish in geophysics. What is that number, and how did you arrive at that conclusion?
Well, I did it by a simple application of a branch of magic called statistics. Computed the distribution of the number of authors of a paper for each year, and then I computed the most likely value for this number, which is the average.
And what is that average?
It currently stands at something like 3.5 authors per article. It's the most likely size of a team to produce an article in geophysics.
What do you think these trends you found in geophysics looking over these decades says about the industry as a whole?
Well, first of all, I was amazed by how sustained and deep the decline of the industry has been. You can see it in the article. Looking at this huge decline feels a bit like being the shepherd grazing his sheep among majestic ancient ruins, wondering how it must have been to live at the height that magnificent civilization. Having been connected to the industry for 16 years, I could experience some of the decline gradient myself, but the data gives us an idea of the true magnitude of this issue. The question that comes up immediately is why that has occurred. The total number of industry R&D publications is ultimately a rough measure of aggregate investment in research and development. Unfortunately, R&D has been the first thing cut in each oil price bust. This creates a cumulative effect and destroys continuity of knowledge and schools of thought. Management is rewarded on the basis of short-term company results, not whether research programs that they start now would have yielded great results 7 years down the road. So this is one kind of example where government-sponsored research institutes, such as those in China, may have a structural advantage. Also, the atmosphere of job insecurity in these busts leads to people being extremely conservative. People are focused on keeping their jobs, not on taking risks, and arguing for allocating resources to a cost center or arguing for a new technology that may fail to bring the hoped for returns. I believe that this trend will continue until we run out of the low-hanging fruit of unconventional resources, which the truth is they need little geophysics. This may take decades. The demand side is also an issue, given the demographic headwinds in all developed countries, hence lower consumption and the continual improvement of alternative modes of transportation and energy solutions. So the pressure on researchers to take minimal risk and to effectively mostly do development, not the D in R&D will continue. So an atmosphere of pressure leads to researchers putting all their efforts into implementing, the ideas from above as orders. But unfortunately, managers are usually selected based on how hard they can push people to work, on how much they can cut costs, not on how creative they are. Truly great research ideas do not come on demand in a 15-minute brainstorming session. So at least this is a reality in the short run. Once unconventionals are exhausted, we're going to have a big price spike, in my opinion, because the middle ground of classic reservoirs has already been explored and produced quite exhaustively. And then we might have to go directly to complex environments such as the fault belts on land, subbasalt, ultra deep water, the Arctic. But I'm not worried about that in the short run.
Where do you see the next evolution of this research going?
Well, this kind of analysis can certainly be widened in scope to analyzing, the flagship journals of different geographical regions, so as to get global coverage and to solve some of the questions that the article is posing. And also analyze SEG abstracts can, of course, be applied to other industries. And who knows, there are probably other people who are doing that. Or one can go in depth using lexical analysis and data science segmentation techniques to look at the number of publications for various subfields of geophysical research, which again should bring light into some of the questions that this exploratory data analysis has only opened. And I have had people giving me feedback. So let's say I've seen others who may be doing it.
What was one thing that surprised you, one conclusion, one trend you discovered that you did not expect to find when you started on this work?
Really, the surprise was how sustained the decline of the industry has been. That was the main. The main. I mean, I kind of knew that a little bit anecdotally, and I'm, like you get that feel, when you just look at data without quantitative tools. But that was by far the main surprise. I also had an idea about some of the evolutions of number of publications in some of the more obvious cases, for different countries, but I didn't expect for some of these trends to be so great in the case of countries.
Is it possible that the industry is allocating its funds through universities or other research institutions, and they've just kind of changed the model for how they produce research that they're supporting?
Now, I might have mentioned briefly in the beginning of this conversation, you need the whole pipeline. You need to implement the research. You need the people to understand it, test it in prototype size, test it with your data, scale it up, test it with field data. This whole pipeline is, continues to exist and would have shown some evidence of existing. Doesn't make sense for the industry to sponsor huge, numbers of papers, only not to have the people to even properly analyze everything that's published.
Kind of taking a step back, one of the things I really liked about this paper that you did is how collaborative it was with other SEG members and staff, people you acknowledge in the paper. Could you explain just how this paper even happened?
I love playing with data. I love exploring it. And, I could perceive, as I mentioned, a disconnect between the marketing rhetoric, how great we are doing. We are breaking new barriers and paradigms, every other weekend. The anecdotal evidence of what I was seeing. So I set to explore the actual data. I released the first version of this work on LinkedIn a year ago. Got about 500 views in the first month. I could see, by the way, that in the article analytics aggregated by LinkedIn, that 17 of these had the title of CEOs, which was nice. It looks like garnered some interest. So some people provided great feedback, which improved the paper quite a lot. Sergey Fomel suggested I look at the distribution of the number of authors over the years. And Alex Martinez suggested I analyze collaborations between affiliation categories. And at that time, the affiliation data in XML was quite incomplete for a large interval from 1997 to 2004. And Alex contacted Isaac Fairley and Adrienne White from SEG, asking them to look into fixing this issue. They, Jennifer Cobb, and other people worked with the vendor of the conversion solution from scanned PDF into XML. They fixed it, and then I had clean data. It was fantastic. They did a great job, and I'm so grateful to Alex. And then I had a complete data set to rerun my analysis tools on.
What do you hope readers take away from your article?
Well, that really depends on the reader. Somebody may be looking into these trends in order to do their own career planning. Some industry leaders may actually realize that in investment, the contrarian strategy has always worked better than that of following the crowd. So by doing actual R&D, they might gain a competitive, and not just trying to mimic the published budgets of their competitors. They might actually gain competitive advantage and a resounding success. Ultimately, the human species has advanced by, boldly going where none have gone before. But we are a species of explorers, of risk takers. This has gotten us, all the way from our beginnings to the moon. So I believe that this is what ultimately will advance this industry, and not cowering in terror about budget cuts.
Is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up here?
I really hope that this will be useful for others as much or even more than it has been useful to me, for the actual understanding brought about by the article, and for the questions that are opened, and also for learning and growth opportunities when trying to explore and work on this kind of questions.
At seg.org/podcast, you will find the show notes and links to the September TLE articles. Subscribers can read the full articles online, and abstracts are always free. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews bring a smile to our faces. Follow Seismic Sound Off at seg.org/podcast to hear new episodes. Seismic Sound Off is sponsored by the SEG Wiki, the place to find hundreds of biographies of geoscientists, open access tutorials, and ongoing translations of SEG's best-selling book, Robert Sheriff's Encyclopedic Dictionary. Type wiki.seg.org into your browser to visit the world's first online geophysics encyclopedia. Original music by Zach Bridges. This episode was hosted, edited, and produced by Andrew Geary. Special thanks to the SEG podcast team, Jennifer Crockett, Allie McGinnis, Teresa Richard, and Mick Sweeney. Thank you for listening. This is Seismic Sound Off, signaling off.